Hello, my name is Melissa Bada-Havren, and I am pleased to present my SIOP lesson plan, Healthy and Unhealthy Foods, for April 2021 at Point Park University Master's Program. My lesson context. So the theme of my work was health, wellness, and physical development, learning about my body. And this came from Standard Area 10.1 from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. The lesson topics discussed were how to identify healthy and unhealthy foods. The length of the class is approximately 40 minutes, 3 times per week. The grade level was to appeal to a first grade level, roughly in the age ranges of 5 to 7 years. And the English language proficiency scale. I estimated this at an ELP level 6 reaching and an ELP level 4 expanding. I assumed that the students had certain background knowledge, and I referenced this in features 7 and 8 of the SIOP lesson plan. Students will have a background of healthy and unhealthy foods as they make choices every day, usually with an adult guidance as to what they would like to eat for a balanced school lunch in the nutritious school lunch programming, which is specific to public schools. So my content and language objectives. So the expectation here is that the content and language objectives will be orally stated by the educator first and then written on the whiteboard. Content and language objectives will be repeated daily and sometimes by a student in the classroom. The content and language objectives, the content objectives, 10.1.1c, students will be able to identify the differences between unhealthy and healthy food. And this identification will come from images used, so illustrations, which we'll get to, I believe, in slide 6. And we'll be able to verbally identify healthy and unhealthy foods. The language objectives, 10.2.1a. Students will be able to share what foods are healthy and unhealthy while communicating in both a small group and class environment. So different types of scaffolding coming into play here. Students will be able to listen to a story about different types of foods and discuss the main idea in a classroom setting. So that classroom collaboration is very important. Students will be able to create a poster listing the illustrations and what they perceive as healthy and unhealthy foods based on the lesson discussed in class. So right here, this last point, this is a great opportunity for the children to share their own representation of what they consider to be healthy foods. So again, asking the children to comment and give their opinion on this really gives you an idea of how their culture perceives certain foods. So this is very useful to both the student, the individual student, the class, and the teacher. And next, we had the key vocabulary and teaching methods. As you can see in blue, kind of a light blue, I have highlighted certain words that were taken directly from the SIOP text as a guide. My key vocabulary terms: healthy foods, food groups, unhealthy foods, fuel, nutrition, well-being, good habits, and food charts. I selected these vocabulary terms very specifically with the content and language objectives in mind, and also any background knowledge that children might already have. After looking at various vocabulary terms, I felt these would be the most beneficial and the easiest to understand for the various levels of proficiency for the students. My methods to teach vocabulary. I believe this was the second and third SIOP lessons. Cognitive and metacognitive. The first step as a classroom is to preview your vocabulary, to clearly enunciate, use gestures to explain all of the vocabulary words, as well as the other words while reading. And our text is the very hungry caterpillar. And I feel that anytime you use gestures and body language to accompany speech, I believe you're going to have children that are more engaged in what you're talking about, rather than just to stand up there and not express it through the use of gestures or other body language. Second, watch audio and visual summary of the very hungry caterpillar. Watching this on the PowerPoint, it's an example of a cognitive exercise. Also under that cognitive umbrella, to state the vocabulary orally first, and then notate or highlight on the smartboard. So this very simple action of notating or highlighting after you've discussed something orally allows it to stand out to that child. And also the children will have a copy, a handout of the vocabulary words for themselves that they can follow along, and that copy will also be notated and highlighted. So they're able to go back and use that for a reference. Continuously make connections with past lessons. For example, how do certain foods make you feel? An example of that would be a cupcake. Do you feel better when you eat a cupcake or better when you eat an apple, and why? So really challenging students to reach beyond that simple yes and no question and to really elaborate their responses. Next, using a smartboard or multimedia to demonstrate to students how to match vocabulary words to the corresponding picture that best describes the words. I thought this one in particular would be useful, as most of the L's respond better to instruction when visual aids are incorporated with the lesson. Continue to expose the children to vocabulary through frequent repetition, class discussion, and larger concept questions. So again, branching out from that simple yes and no. Imagery. Asking students to close their eyes and imagine examples of healthy and unhealthy foods. Reading the vocabulary words and asking students what is the first thing they imagine when they hear a vocabulary word. This is a great example of metacognitive way of exposing the child to vocabulary. Generating questions to guide comprehension. But most importantly, when you generate those questions, allowing an appropriate wait time for those students to answer, and keeping in mind that we all process things at a different rate, especially our English language learners. For example, when we talk about good nutrition, what are some daily changes you can make in your everyday life to be more healthy? So really tapping in beyond those yes and no questions to where they're challenged to think at a more critical level. To provide adapted vocabulary sheets for English language learners that is bold, highlighted, and possibly with illustrations, depending on their level of proficiency. Most important, I think, is an excellent, I've used it in my classes, is verbal scaffolding, right? Think out louds, small group collaboration. And this is going to come in the form, which we'll see later in my next slide, of four corners vocabulary, a vocabulary matching game. So really doing those things that challenge them to work both independently and collaboratively. I wanted to show you an example of my vocabulary breakdown. So here I have the same exact vocabulary words that I did on the previous slide, but with corresponding illustrations. I have healthy food as fruit, unhealthy food, cupcakes, nutrition as various foods that are good for your body, And the food group breakdown. I chose to break down the food group using an image that most public schools use, and they have actually in their cafeterias on the walls to kind of show the students what you're getting, what groups you're getting from every meal. Well-being, of course, a feeling of being happy, energetic, as you can see here. Fuel, gas tank fuel. Food charts, just a very basic breakdown of your food chart. And building good habits. I chose to use Legos. I thought it would be kind of a catchy illustration to get their attention. And building with Legos, building good habits. And then our lesson activities and grouping. So some of my rationale behind this. The grouping configurations to support language and content objectives. First, we had large group configuration, where we gather the entire class on the carpet for an audio story of the Very Hungry Caterpillar. To me, it was very important that this story includes subtitles. So certain students that maybe were at a different proficiency level could follow along and practice their reading skills. Kinesthetic movement. This activity in which students will jump up and down when they hear a healthy vocabulary word or slump over when they hear an unhealthy vocabulary word. The teacher says the word, holding up the corresponding illustration, again, repeating and showing visually for those that are visual learners what that vocabulary word is. I've actually, on a personal note, I've used this in my classroom. It works extremely well. The children love the fact that they can get up and move around. Small group configuration. Definitely break this one down into 5 to 10 minute periods. I think we have to be mindful when children are at a certain age, just how well they can concentrate and focus. So 4 corners vocabulary worksheets, a vocabulary matching game, and food sorting activity on poster board, linking this one specifically to the content objectives to be shared with the class. So again, for all the small group configurations, being very mindful that when they're broken down into small groups or increments, they are more beneficial to students because it's not going over the amount of time they're able to focus. Some of the benefits, this was really important as I was doing this section. It was important to me that all the lessons are designed to engage students in meaningful activities and promote collaboration with their peers. We have small group configurations, promote interaction, develop student independence, and engage directly with peers in a cognitive activity that is meaningful. And being very mindful here in the small groups that when you match them up, you're mixing various proficiency levels so they can learn from one another. Helping students focus on fluency of their content objectives. Reinforcing language objectives with poster board and practice listening and speaking skills as students share projects. So again, practicing listening and speaking skills, very important throughout your life. Sometimes children learn better from other children. So hearing them say the vocabulary words, explain the meanings, it's actually been proven they can learn much more by listening to other children. Large group configurations, designed to allow meaningful group discussion in which students are encouraged to elaborate their answers. So tapping into that critical thinking. And recalling past lessons, cultivate an open environment in which students feel comfortable sharing their own unique experiences. This one right here, large group instruction, I think this really has the ability to be a very culturally responsive lesson. Anytime you're asking a student to share with the class something about them, something that might be personal, by making it personal, you're allowing them to feel more comfortable in your classroom and more likely to succeed. Classroom demonstrations and materials. This one I really had actually a very fun time with. I did practice on my son before he's roughly this age, and he seemed to enjoy it. The first is the word wall. I'm going to start with the word wall because it's something that as I go through this lesson with the students, the word wall will be visible to all students in the room. It will be a combination of words and illustrations and available to all students no matter where they're positioned in the classroom. So some of the key materials: grouping, the sorting activity, grouping as healthy and unhealthy. We have the words up here, healthy, not healthy. We have illustrations to go along with them. And we also have the faces, healthy being happy, not healthy being sad. The sorting activity displayed vocabulary words. You have your graphic images. I said the smiley faces and frowns. And each of these words, you'll see the illustrations here, each are accompanied by a word to reinforce what the picture is and whether or not you can file it as healthy or unhealthy. I think this is a great activity for students of this age. I think it reinforces the content objectives, and it's a great model for a small group graphic organizer activity and absolutely reinforces the vocabulary. This would be something I would do probably in a Smartboard class activity. However, I feel this would be more beneficial to have the students group together and then go around to each group and ask them to file one in either healthy or unhealthy. The Four Corners vocabulary. The Four Corners vocabulary is constant repetition and reinforcement. This tool, in my opinion, helps academic language. It reinforces vocabulary. It helps build the vocabulary by using words in a sentence. And it gives more meaning of the word to the student. If they can define the word, put that word in a sentence, and then have an illustration, each of these four corners have been satisfied, and that information is being reinforced to them. So they are constantly making those connections with the uses of illustrations, sentences, and definitions. Then lastly, I have my references and conclusion page, definitely taken from the text that we utilized in class to make the SIOP models. Of course, I wanted to point out, as an educator, I often use the site Teachers Pace Teachers, which is the second to last. I absolutely love that site. I think it has a lot of valuable information, especially for elementary age students, and a lot of good ideas. And of course, what I found to be the most beneficial and what kind of kept coming into my mind as I was doing this project was the YouTube video that we watched on the school in Kansas with differentiated instruction strategies and flexible grouping. This is probably one of the most helpful things as I was going through and making this presentation. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation as much as I enjoyed creating it and giving it to you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.